finally move out and we'll start to see some sunshine this week. We're so glad you're with us. Let me just tell you, I know there's a lot of folks who are still doing the at home and joining us online. And I just want to take a moment and tell you that we really miss you. We are seeing just greater attendance week after week. Yesterday, our early service I thought was one of the most attended services we've seen at that early hour. And then our 10:45 service was just a really good crowd again. So we're seeing more and more people come back to join us in person. And that's just exciting. It is so wonderful to see some of our families start to come back together in person. I know there's many of you who are still cautious, and we respect that, but I hope that you'll set a goal in front of you. Maybe for you it is once you get your second vaccine, then you're going to come back. Do something though. Make some kind of plan so that you can join us again in person. I love this, that we have the capabilities to stream devotions and services, but let's never forget that there is no substitute for the body of believers gathering together to worship, to praise, to pray for one another, to hold each other accountable. There are some things that you cannot do online through a virtual environment like this is. I'm not belittling it. I'm thankful for it, but this is not the end goal for us. And so look for those times to come back. I'm also reminded that it becomes very easy in the last year to use COVID-19 as an excuse. Now, we don't all do that. There are some valid reasons to stay home. If you're, a high-risk individual, I totally understand that. What I'm talking about is when we feel like we can go anywhere else, we can go to town, we can go to eat, we can go to restaurants, but yet we can't come to church. That's when there is a problem. And so let's look for that time that we can all come back together. There are some who it has been since last March since we've really engaged back into the house of the Lord. And so let's begin to set that time to come back together. If you're just really cautious still, but you want to take that step, let me encourage you that 8:15 early service, you can come in and I can just about promise you, you could stay 15 feet away from the next nearest person. And so there's lots of opportunities for us to worship together. But we did have great services yesterday and just excited about what God is doing here in the body of believers at Woodland Hills. Continue to pray for Brother Charles and Miss Becky. Miss Becky is doing well. She is tired, but no severe symptoms from COVID. And Brother Charles is still feeling good. And so pray for them that they can continue to do well. Look forward to them being back with us just as soon as possible. Well, let me just give you a quick devotion, excuse me, from the book of Ruth, chapter 1. Let me read it to you. Ruth 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of the 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah, and they went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives, and the name of the one was Orpah, the name of the other was Ruth, and they lived there for about 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband." Ruth is an incredible story. The Bible tells us that there is a famine in the land of Bethlehem. Now, famines happen, but we also see in the book of Deuteronomy that many times when there is a famine, it can be the discipline of God. And so I believe in Bethlehem, there is the discipline of God coming down, and there is great need in the land. And we meet this man, Elimelech. And he's a father, he's a husband, and so he sees it as his job to provide for the needs of his family. He looks around and the land is rough. Imagine the Great Depression, if you will. There's very little food, there's no work, very little money or resources, and so he makes a decision. And his decision is to leave Bethlehem, which is where the people of God are dwelling, and go out to Moab. Now, the Moabites are the enemy of the people of Bethlehem here. And so he's leaving the people of God and is going towards the pagan enemies, the ones who have no honor, no regard, no respect for the things of God. And he takes this journey, and the Bible says he sojourns. What that means is it's a temporary trip. He does not plan on staying long. It's not a trip that he plans to go and set up residence in Moab, but rather he's trying to leave and he's trying to avoid the difficult circumstances. Here's what I want you to notice. He was trying to fix things on his own, and we do not read where he was seeking the will of God. We don't read where he prayed and said, God, what do you want out of me and my family? We don't read where he begins to fast and seek the face of God. All we see is that he's focused on the physical and not on the spiritual, and because of this, he takes matters into his own hands, and he gets further and further outside the will of God. And he goes to Moab. He expects to be there only a small amount of time, but the Bible says he remains 10 years. And while he's in Moab, this whole family is destroyed. Elimelech dies and his two sons die, and all that's left is Naomi, this woman. She leaves with her family, but later on in the story, she returns and they are dead. Here's what I want you to see. When we get outside of the will of God, it can always take us further than we ever wanted to go. It can keep us longer than we ever wanted to stay, and it will cost us more than we ever wanted to pay. Here's a family, here's a man who wanted to just go on a trip. He wanted to make things better, but in doing so, he got outside the will of God. He expected there to be no dire consequences, but there were. In our life, we must understand when we begin to step outside the will of God, it always brings consequences. You think about an alcoholic who begins to drink. You know, it starts with one drink, and the belief is it's not going to be a big deal. I'm just going to do it this one time, but it can grow to the point that it brings dire consequences in a life. Think of an affair that happens. You know, it often starts with just one glance, with just one look, and then one lustful thought in the mind, and then a desire for more and more and more until it has destroyed a marriage. Most sin starts small. And so here this man is, and he begins to lead his family out from the people of God into Moab, and he takes them one step at a time. My question I want us to think about this morning is, what is your Moab? What is it in your life that's taking you away from the presence of God into the pagan land and the pagan opportunity around us? And every step you take, you get further and further away from the Lord. Every one of us, we have Moabs in our life, and they're going to bring destruction and they're going to bring doom. It starts just one. Let's think of David and Bathsheba. One day, David should be at battle, but instead he's taking a stroll on his rooftop, and he looks over and he sees a beautiful woman. And that sin grows, and it leads to adultery, it leads to murder, and then it leads to consequence. If we're not careful, we're going to focus on the physical, and we're going to deny the spiritual, and it's going to bring about terrible consequences in our life. So again, what is the Moab in your life, and what are you going to do to avoid it? How are you going to stay in the center of the will of God? Let me just tell you to do this. As you begin this week, seek after God. Say, Lord, what do you want from me this week? What do you want from my family this week? How can I honor you? What I want most in my life is to be right in the center of God's will. What you ought to want in your life is to be right in the center of God's will. And so think about that. Maybe you're in Moab, and the time for you is to come home. Come back to the Lord. Seek Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So think about that today. Thank you so much for being with us. Can't wait to see you on Wednesday. If there's anything you need, just let us know, and we'll be glad to help you out any way that we can. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.